Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So today I decided it would be a good idea to talk about past lives. For some people, past lives are a theory or an idea or a philosophy or whatever. For me, it's not that way because I remember my past lives pretty directly. I actually remembered two of them from the time I was born. So I often say that I don't believe in past lives because belief implies that you have to make a leap of some kind in order to decide that something is true. And I don't believe in rocks either because I can pick them up and hold them, work with them. I don't believe in trees because I can see them. So in that sense, I don't believe in reincarnation or past lives. Whether it's a literal thing where a part of your particular soul is going into these different lives and then coming together afterwards and remembering them, or whether it's a method of accessing information and you remember things well enough that by virtue of the fact that you experience it, it becomes yours, is something that's, I'm sure, up for debate, and people can decide for themselves. I'm open to both of those interpretations. I just know that for me, these things have become real and have always been real when it comes to that. So the first two lives that I remembered was being burned at the stake as a witch, and the other one was a time that isn't historical in a place that I'm not sure is completely physical or not, because there were things that happened there that we don't see in our physical reality. So it could have been an in-between place, a place of more spirit, less physical body. But it was a marvelous set of memories. And I could see my aura, I could see power spots, they showed up, everyone could see them. And in that life, I was an aura dancer. I could take people's colored energy from around them and weave stories and pictures together. And in one of those experiences, I actually saw the world in the future as a dark and lonely and terrible place, and made a decision to come back to try and bring light into that world. Some people consider that hubris. At the time, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like an ego thing in that life. It was just an emotional reaction to seeing such things coming in the future, a place that was dark and empty. And I wanted to do something about it. Whether it works or not, that's a whole different issue. But it was interesting to me that those were the two lives that I remembered from the time I was little. In fact, I don't remember a time when I didn't know them. So there are some of my earliest memories. And it gave me both a warning and hope, I suppose, because that way, I didn't take the warning well about being burned at the stake for being a witch, but I have a hard time keeping myself under wraps. It's just sort of impossible for me to figure out how to do that well, but I knew I was a witch. Whether I was really a witch in that life or not doesn't matter, I guess, at this point. But past lives, there's a lot of different types of past life memories, and sometimes they're dangerous to remember, sometimes they happen spontaneously, sometimes they're in dreams, or they're in relationships. So I wanted to address some of those issues with some of my personal experiences. One of the ones that I wanted to remember was my relationship with my son. When he was little, I started to notice I had this very bizarre pattern where whenever I was cleaning, especially a bathroom for some reason, but whenever I was cleaning pretty much, and he walked into the space where I was cleaning, I would get extremely agitated and angry. And he was just a little guy, a little toddler, a few years old, and not fair to him. when he was around 6 years old is when I met David, who became the guy who chronicled my New Age channeling that I did. And it actually got more and more activated as he got older. And so I decided it would be a worthwhile endeavor to go into that particular, to any past lives that we might have together, to help me understand that relationship with my son and why it made me angry. And it was a pretty interesting memory, one of my more unique ones, really, because I remembered being in a medieval kind of village, and my son in this life was a lord in that life, and I was picked out of the village to be the person who gave him babies and whatnot. So I ended up being forced to live in the manor and have his children, and I hated him and I wanted him dead. That was like right from the beginning, but it got worse. For some reason or somehow, I learned how to write and read, which was like not okay. I don't remember the details of that. But I started writing this really bad fairy tale, sort of like a Cinderella tale, the one I remembered. And so I had found a room up in the tower where I could write, and would sneak away for that. And I'd be up there writing, and one day he found me. And so he burned the book I had written, the story I had written, and then banned me from the tower. And that was when my hatred of him and my situation got to be extreme. So I started plotting his death. And I was planning on killing him with poison, because, I had something to do with the food. And, that was an easy access thing for me. And so I went and started planning what poison to use and how I was going to use it. And then one day he went out on a hunting trip, and his horse shied from something, threw him off the saddle, and he hit his head on a rock and died. And I was really mad that he died, because I had wanted to kill him, so that was very frustrating for me. This whole life was a series of frustrations. And so then, after he died, my children at the time, they kicked me out of the house and threw me out on the street, because after all, I wasn't of noble birth or noble blood. I was just like the brood mare or something. And so, I was pretty disillusioned and depressed and had nowhere to go, and so I decided to kill myself. So I jumped in a lake and swam out to the middle and started to drown, and some passerby came along and jumped in the water and came out and rescued me, and really made me mad. I was really upset. So I failed at killing him, I failed at killing myself, and then I saw this dog, like a real ratty dog, all covered in, his fur was all matted up and stuff like that. He was like a yellow colored dog, and he looked miserable. I felt miserable, and we kind of bonded. And then someone in the village took pity on me, and I lived above a store, like a bakery or something like that. There was a little room upstairs, and I was up there. And so I stayed there, and then I had a heart attack, I can only assume, because I was suddenly not in my body, and my body was on the floor. And then I wondered what was going on, and then I stayed with my body, and I stayed with my dog, because I wasn't sure if they were going to find me or not. And then they finally found me, and they buried me, and my dog sat on my grave, and I didn't want to leave my dog, so I sat with my dog, and then my dog finally died, and then I wasn't sure what to do, and decided to go and haunt my children, because they were terrible. So I went back to the manor and tried to be a nasty ghost, but I couldn't move anything, and they couldn't hear me or see me, so I went back to my grave not knowing what to do, and I failed at being a ghost. And then a voice at some point said, "Why are you here?" And I didn't remember why I was there anymore, so then I was somewhere else. And I actually experienced what happened after my death. So for me, this was one of my most interesting past life regressions, because I remembered a lot from the in-between time as I did from the time I was here. And I found myself seeing all of my actions and my thoughts. They displayed themselves as these different thought forms, and pretty much everything in that life was ugly, angry, and whatnot, except for trying to write the book and my feelings towards the dog. And at that point, everybody was raised in Christianity, I can only assume, because that's sort of what I thought at the time. And I decided that even though I didn't succeed in killing him or killing myself, I clearly deserved to go to hell. And so I did. I found myself in my version of hell, whatever it was, and proceeded to torture myself for a period of time, and I don't know how long, because time is not the same. At some point, I couldn't remember why I was there and what I was being punished for, and then I left. And I can only assume at that point I went into another life. So remembering all this was very informative and cathartic for me, because what it said to me was that my son, who had been my lord of the manor in that life, had actually put himself into a position of helplessness under me, so that I could decide how to handle it and what to do. And it gave me context into these irrational feelings that I had about him around cleaning. And I was actually able to change my behavior in this life and not react and not treat him that way. And so there can be good reasons for remembering past life experiences, and that is one of them, to be able to put this current life into some sort of perspective, so that you can make a different choice. I found it kind of hysterical that all throughout the memory of it, I was just very annoyed at my failure at all these things. And that's always interesting, too, to experience a completely different view of the world and how things are. So I remembered a lot of different lives besides that one, probably more than a dozen at this point. And some of them were spontaneous. One of them in particular was just a spontaneous memory that was triggered, that only happened for a few seconds, except it was so incredibly vivid. My mother ran out of gas. We had a VW camper bus, and she parked the bus. She pulled over off the highway underneath an overpass, and left me in the camper by myself and turned on the four-way blinkers. So there was this red light and this sound that was going, blink, 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 with the red light flashing on the dash with it over and over and over again. And there were vehicles going on the highway above us, and as the big trucks went over, they made this kind of echoing sort of sound that went back and forth and echoed through there. And it was definitely hypnotic, because there was nothing else. There wasn't a radio on, because we were out of gas, and turning on something that would drain the battery more was not considered an okay thing to do. And suddenly I went from sitting in the VW camper bus to finding myself in a cave in France, with bombs falling. I could hear the sound of the bombs flying, whistling as they fell through the air. And I was with a group of people. There were elderly people, young people, women, and we were all hiding in this cave. And I knew I was a nurse, and then suddenly the memory went away, and I was back in the camper bus. So that one was like a surprise event. So the thing about remembering past lives, a lot of times people are really keen on the idea of trying to remember who they were before. Lots of people remember being, spectacular beings or individuals, kings, queens, and whatnot. And of course the reality is most people aren't. although I think that there might be some lives that are so archetypal that that idea of being able to go into that life and remember pieces of it or experience it could actually be a real thing. So you could remember being Joan of Arc or Cleopatra or whatever, and not literally have been them, but remember the memories that are out there that are theirs in that sense. So that's one of my theories anyway. And I had one experience with a past personality coming forward from another life into this one, which was sort of unexpected, and I've not, I mean, I guess other people might have had that happen to them, but it was definitely something I hadn't expected at the time. And my best friend, she lived in the house where I was in Santa Cruz, and we got close extremely quickly. It's like we recognized each other. She felt like she had been my brother. We knew that it had been in Egypt, and I remembered parts of that life before, where part of an initiation ritual that we went through was taking some kind of a drug that separated your astral form, your spirit body, from your body, and then for 3 days you were traveling through time and space and looking into your own future, or your own lives and that kind of thing, and then you had to make your way back to your body in order to survive it. And I hadn't been in the community for very long at that point, and she had a friend who their entire family was having trouble with nightmares and a sense of foreboding. They thought they had a ghost of some kind that was there, and they asked me if I could go over and check it out. And so I was getting ready to go over and check it out like I've done any number of other times, and suddenly this wave of energy came up in me, and a different personality came forward, and she took over. She said her name was Kiramine. She was the sister of my friend in this life, in that past life, and she was there to help release his spirit, his ka, because it had gotten stuck. And so I gathered some stuff together that I knew I needed, different crystals and things like that. I was doing things I wasn't really conscious of doing. I mean, I was aware that I was doing them, but I knew how to do something I had never tried doing before. And I went over to the house in this state, and I saw that there was some kind of an energy vortex at the house, and knew that the ancient Ka had gotten stuck in this energetic vortex because this was one of the lives that he was looking at into the future, because she lived there. And so I built a crystal machine. I can only say there were all these stones, and I put them in a configuration until I could get them to reverse that energetic vortex that was there, and stop it long enough for the Ka to find its way back and to escape. And so that's what I did, and that fixed the nightmares that the people were having. And I think a lot of times in haunting situation, frustrated spirits or entities are trying to get information across, and it's not easy, as when I found out when I was trying to be a ghost and nobody could hear me. And when we're sleeping is one of the times when we're most vulnerable or most open to receiving that kind of information. And that the nightmares they were having about this thing that was there was a call for help. The frustration that he was feeling in being trapped and trying to get some assistance. And of course, when we see something that's like aggressively yelling, we assume it's a bad thing. So, and then after it was over and after the property was released, there was another thing too. There was two streams crossing each other under the property, and that can cause a lot of problems for people that are living on top of it. But we cleared most of that out, and so as far as I know, the people were fine afterwards. And certainly we all felt better. Whether it's accurate or not is, one of those things. It's a subjective experience and my interpretation of it. And there are occasions where remembering a past life can become a critical moment in your own existence. There was a young man who was here, and he had a spontaneous past life memory come flooding back because the History Channel was doing a whole series on the Civil War and the battles during the Civil War. And they were very visceral commercials. They, had the battle there with all the sounds and everything else. And when he saw the commercial, it all came back. And he felt where he'd gotten shot and thought that he had died. And he was a teenager at the time. And it was pretty clear that it was freaking him out. And so we actually did an emergency past life regression here in this room to help him get back into that past life, and he identified people that he knew in this one. In that one, he also went through that memory of the battle and remembered that he survived it and went on, and so it helped to give him some kind of context. I think it's when we have these things without any kind of context and we don't know what comes next that they can be extremely dangerous to our psyche. And so that happened. But when it comes to doing them, Moira, who is my spirit guardian or whatever you call it, that I channeled through those many years of being a medium, explained that when you're born, it's like your past lives and other knowledge and stuff is like a bud. It's like a flower bud inside of you. And that if things are going the way they're supposed to, when that opens and you remember past lives, it's at a point where your psyche can handle it. So trying to force it open to make yourself remember things that aren't in context with whatever it is that's going on can be dangerous to you, can be dangerous to your energy field, to your very sanity. People have been known to be stuck in a former personality. My mother knew someone who had that happen for 2 years after she went through a past life regression. And so, finding out who you were before is not necessarily helpful. It really depends upon your own circumstances and where you are in your personal development overall. And not something I recommend people just run around and go looking for. Of course, others will disagree with me, and that's fine. They can disagree with me all they want. But the thing about being in a body and being here, one of the things that being in a physical form in this plane does is it separates you from the chaos of all of those past life memories and all that other knowledge that you may have in between lives, and it sort of gives you a clean slate. Most people, you get a bit of a clean slate so you can start fresh and try and build yourself back up and then see what you can learn. There are definitely they've all been interesting, and I definitely have remembered a lot of them being in other temples, being in a temple to Aphrodite, being in a temple to Isis. I remember 2 different lifetimes in Egypt. And the other thing, though, that was very confusing for me in the beginning is when I would meet people that I knew from another life, I had this incorrect assumption that just because I knew them in a past life meant I ought to know them in this one. And I know there's that whole notion of spirit families, being born together and working through things, but you still have free will and you have choice. So you can decide not to reignite that particular relationship with someone from another life and let it sit where it is. And sometimes I think that's what we're here to learn. how to set effective boundaries for the body and the life and the personality that we are currently in. So, there's certainly plenty of websites out there and techniques for doing past life regressions and that kind of stuff. And I know lots of people probably do, guided meditations in order to help people remember things. But just, if you're going to do that, just remember that you want to be safe for yourself. So before I ever do any kind of past life regression, even on myself, then it's, calling your higher spirits, your guardian angels, the beings that you're working with or whatever, to come and protect you, and to make sure that any information that you do get isn't going to be extremely harmful or shattering to your psyche, because then that's really a wasted time on Earth if your brain is totally shattered and you don't know what you're doing. Sort of seems like a waste to me. So it's a broad subject and a complicated subject, but this is an introduction to some of my personal experiences with it and some of the various things that can happen when you remember your past lives. And so hopefully it's been informative and helpful, and if you have any questions about this that I can help answer, feel free to send me a message. As always, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. Blessed be.